Okay, so just continuing on to the next clip here, I'm going to continue to show examples of how most of what you find online about the targeting program is going to be controlled by these agents who they have put out there. They completely control all of the info that is disseminated regarding this subject matter, and you aren't going to find absolute truth about it. They are always going to have people, if the person is credible and they do put some legitimate information out there, you're going to find things that they mix in to discredit the people. And you're also going to find, as the example that I'm going to show here, is that they have funded a ton of people to pose as these faux experts, these quote-unquote experts. And this here is Dr. John Hall, and I'm going to give an example here and go through some of his material here and show you that he's just another one of these funded frauds that they have put out there, irrespective of whether or not he has doctor in front of his name. They have put people into all sorts of positions, infiltrated every position. So whether or not the person is an actual medical doctor is irrelevant with regards to the information that he is putting out pertaining to this subject matter. He may well be, I don't know, or he may well be just some person who they've put out there as an actor. I tried to do some research on Wikipedia on this guy, and I didn't get much, but he's going to tell you all you need to know about him here, and if you listen closely, you can quickly pick up on things, and you can tell exactly what he's trying to do. So some key points here that I want to look at. If you have researched this subject matter, you know that what they want to do with credible people, so if there's a person out there who is documenting these activities, the stalking and harassment of the police, first responders, community-based agents who they use to follow and mob targeted people everywhere they go, if they're documenting that in a credible way, what they want to do is always try and do anything possible to try and associate that person with unfounded mental health issues. So they're going to always try and get some sort of fake mental health diagnosis against that person, and they're going to get people around them to make up lies and try and slander that person and say they're unstable if they are actually documenting these things and exposing it in a credible way. So what they've got here, you have to pay attention to what Dr. John Hall says, and if you do, it's not too hard to see that what he's saying falls into that, falls into what they want to do precisely. So what he's doing is, you're going to find out with what he says. I'll show you in this clip exactly what I'm talking about and how his purpose is to continue to reinforce that narrative while at the same time, while simultaneously posing as someone who is helping, right? Posing as someone who's out there to help people, someone who's out to expose this, to shine a quote-unquote bright light on dark shadows. The reality is nothing further from the truth, and this is more of just another occult inversion here with him. He is not who you might think he is, and a lot of the people out there, they have these funded shills. When they put them out there, they tell them to promote these faux experts, such as this man here, such as doctor, quote-unquote doctor. If he is a doctor, maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Robert Duncan, who's another one. But let's just focus on Dr. John Hall here, and I want to show you that what he's saying and what he's trying to do, you can see that there's an agenda beneath the veneer of this situation, and while he may on the outside to people who don't know about this seem to be legitimately concerned about these things and trying to help, the reality is that the people who set these things up are very clever, and while he may seem like he's trying to help to some people, if you really use discernment, you can tell what he's really trying to do, and I'm going to show you that here. Here we go. Now let's listen to what Dr. John Hall is saying right off the bat. Again, it's kind of hard to find information about the background of this guy, but he's going to tell you a little bit about who he really is right here at the beginning, and to someone who has discernment, you can make a lot from what he's going to say here. So we'll go through this video. I'm not going to play the whole thing, and I'll comment intermittently on some of the clips here, on some of what he says to further prove my point, to further support my thesis that almost all of the people who they set up online posing as people who are trying to help are actually agents, and they are there to push specific agendas, and they are not there to really help people who are being targeted by the program. Okay, so let's start here.
When I wrote the book, I kind of did my own searches and talked to some connections that I had within the CIA.
Okay, so right there, the first sentence out of his mouth, right? He said when he wrote his book, A New Breed and I guess Guinea Pigs, or those are the two books I guess he's written, two of them anyway. He said that he talked to some of his connections in the CIA. now, you got to know that the average person, the average Joe Blow, the average guy working a 9-to-5 job, or even just the average doctor, doesn't just have connections to people in the CIA. You know what I mean? That right there is a sign. Now, the reason they put that out there, I think, is because you could get people who could do some digging and find out some information on this guy. So they're going to put that out there right away and just make it sound innocent. It's not innocent at all, and he's telling you right there, he has connections to the CIA. Who are the people who are involved at the top of orchestrating a lot of these operations, the targeting operations? Okay? There you go. So he's admitting right there, he has connections in the CIA. This is not something that the average person has, right? So he's connected right there. He's telling you right there, and he's admitting it.
Just to verify exactly how this technology works, they wouldn't go as far as admitting putting voices in heads. They had no problem admitting the directed energy capability.
Okay, so you hear that there. Again, he's talking about the V2K thing, and he's saying they wouldn't go so far as to admit to putting voices in heads. Now, I've said for a long time that this whole V2K thing is a psyop set up through intelligence agencies. And what do we see here? This is one of the main promulgators of this nonsense about V2K. And what does he say right off the bat? He has connections to the CIA. He has people in the CIA. Now, if you're naive enough to think that there are people out there in the Central Intelligence Agency with good intentions who just want to help people, no, these are the people working to destroy freedoms worldwide and who are orchestrating these operations at the top. So he has connections to those people, admittedly, and he's also talking about this thing here where they wouldn't admit fully to putting voices in people's heads, which the V2K thing, anyone with common sense should be able to put two and two together and see that that is exactly the same description. That it corresponds almost exactly with what are described as symptoms of schizophrenia and what is one of the outcomes that the people running the targeting program want to achieve. Well, they want to slander the people who they're doing these things to, especially if the person is documenting these things and presenting them in a credible way. And they want to get some sort of a false, fake schizophrenia diagnosis by saying the person's delusional simply for documenting the facts. And what is he saying right here? There it is right there. If you think there's any legitimacy to the whole thing with V2K, after having done some research, I'd say you have some difficulty with discernment at the very least. So let's continue on here and hear what else Dr. John Hall has to say. Now, sorry, let me just stop that really briefly there to say that he's also saying here that they would admit to directed energy weapons. Now, I believe directed energy weapons are real and are being utilized. And some of the things I've dealt with would lead me to believe that they are being utilized, but I don't go on and on talking about it because it's a subject matter that's very difficult to find legitimate information that is credible, that you can provide proof of. I can't provide specific proof other than to show things that have happened to me, which maybe correspond with descriptions of what others have described with directed energy weapons. So I do believe those are being utilized, but let's not conflate the two with this whole V2K thing, talking about voices in people's heads, which is exactly the same as symptoms of schizophrenia with their usage of directed energy weapons. That's another thing he wants to do, is kind of conflate the two, and that's what these intelligence agency operatives are told to do.
People had mentioned it in passing, but nobody with really any credentials. So when I wrote the book, I figured half the people that read this are gonna think I'm just as crazy as the victims, you know, but if it reaches a few people and convinces them that this is otherwise, then I figure it's done its job, and it seems to have done that. I've got a second book that's in editing right now called Guinea Pigs, Technologies of Control, which kind of goes more into the history of how it became, and, you know, kind of, at least what I see is, you know, probably gonna be the only way out of it, so. Because everybody's looking for ways to shield themselves and things like that.
Let's also stop this just briefly here. I just want to point out this symbolism back here of the horns. You can just say, okay, that's a random symbol there. No. The horn symbolism with the horned goats or the bull horns, these are occult symbolisms, and nothing is done accidental with these people who they put out there. These people value symbolism tremendously, and they believe that signs and symbols speak a lot more than mere words do. And all you have to do is that famous quote by famous Freemason Manly P. Hall: when the human race learns to understand the language of signs and symbols, a great veil will fall from the eyes of man. So a lot of times they'll put symbolism out there to let others who are watching, who might be unsure, know who they are, because they're not going to come out and tell you that they're an agent or anything like that. So you can see the horned occult symbolism there in the background. And of course the bookshelf, a lot of times they'll have, you know, I know people have bookshelves in their rooms and things like that, so it's common, but a lot of these faux intellectuals, in their videos, you'll see that they've just randomly happened to position them in front of a bookshelf to give the impression that they're very learned and well-read.
And the bottom line is we're gonna need socio-political change probably to do anything about it.
Now, there's some key points coming up here with Dr. John Hall, which I want to focus on in what he says here. So.
Okay.
Now, just let me briefly stop this here also to show another thing here with Dr. John Hall. As you can see here in another clip, I'm not going to go to that one right now. We're going to come back to this one because some of what he says there is very telling, what he's going to say. This here, you can see in this clip here, he is on InfoWars. Now, anyone who really has done any legitimate research knows that InfoWars is a CIA operation, and Alex Jones is a person who was created to discredit people who speak the truth. They don't bring legitimate people who are actual whistleblowers on InfoWars, okay? It's just that simple. So you can see Dr. John Hall was also on InfoWars to talk about this same thing here and push the whole V2K narrative to essentially associate people who are being targeted with this harassment with things that are similar to symptoms of schizophrenia. And that's what the goal is. That's exactly what they're trying to do. That's why they created the V2K PSYOP to begin with. And let's go back here and continue here.
Well, and that's what kind of, you know, I have a pretty good connection with SAPD here. So when I
Okay, so that's another very important point. So he's already told us he has connections to the CIA, who all you have to do is do a little bit of research to know that they have, you know, that they are actually running these operations. And then he's telling us he has a close connection to SAPD, presumably San Antonio Police Department. So he's got close associations with the police and the CIA. Who are some of the people who are most heavily involved in the program? Well, definitely the police, first responders. And he's going to tell you more about how he has, you know, police running in the family here.
You know, to the sex crimes department, the lieutenant in charge had been a patient of mine and was a friend of my father's who was retired SAPD.
Okay, so his father is a retired San Antonio police officer right there. Now, again, if you've done any legitimate research, you can quickly find out that a lot of times these police officers, well, a lot of police officers, admittedly, in those professions, are Freemasons, are involved in Freemasonry. And especially now, it's become more and more prominent where they are encouraged to join lodges. So can we prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that Dr. John Hall is a Freemason? No, but these things run in families. So we've established, he's openly admitted that he has connections to the CIA. And the average person can't just call a connection from the CIA unless they're connected in some way. And that his father was a police officer. Vast majority of people involved in any prominent positions within the police are Freemasons, and that was the case even going back, 20, 30 years ago, although it's much, much more prominent now. And it's heavily encouraged, and that is because they take oaths to Freemasonry, and they will take a vow of silence, and that comes before anything else. And so therefore that becomes before their duties to serve and protect. And so he's the son of a cop, Dr. John Hall, with CIA connections. And on top of it, what is he pushing? What's the agenda he's pushing? Well, he's pushing this V2K stuff, but he's going to mix in a little bit of truth about the actual organized stalking operation. They have to do that to draw you in and to try to lend some credibility to him so that people will listen to him.
And, he told me straight out, he said, if I heard this story from anybody else, I would think they're crazy, but you have my life in your hands, asleep on the table for surgery. I do anesthesia.
So how does that qualify him to talk about organized stalking? Or, for that matter, even this technology that's going on behind the scenes as a medical doctor. The other guy, Dr. Robert Duncan, while he is a complete fraud and he is pushing the same agenda, they claim that at least he had a background within those industries where they were supposedly creating some of this technology. This gentleman here is just a medical doctor. His father was a cop, so we can establish pretty clear connections, although, pretty clear connections to Masonry, essentially. And he has connections to the CIA, which the average person just would not have, unless they're important, right? And his dad was probably an important cop, most likely a Mason as well. And what's the agenda that John Hall's pushing? Well, he wants to associate people who are being targeted with hearing voices. And that is what the V2K PSYOP is all about.
But, coming from you, and your story's never changed, and, so they went through ICE and tried to see if any of this video, if they were videoing any of the sexual assaults and putting them anywhere, and basically, in the end, it's almost kind of like this group of, this former FBI guy is allowed to do it, sort of, which is like what I kind of wondered all along is, if I went following people around and, tampering with their cars and standing around their front doors, I'd be arrested pretty quickly. And
not if you're the son of a cop who was a Mason, you wouldn't.
These guys were so brazen, this wasn't surveillance from afar, or I kind of think that car's following me, or I kind of think that person's following me.
No, they want it to be overt. They want you to know, exactly. Now, this is where he's speaking some legitimate truth. They have to do this to draw people in who are experiencing these things and try to get them to trust this guy, so that they can then try and get those people in turn to start talking about this ridiculous mumbo-jumbo gibberish, this sci-fi nonsense about voices being put into people's heads. And that is done specifically because they want to put a false schizophrenia label on the people they're targeting with these real harassment tactics, which he only focuses on minimally. Most of his focus is on the V2K type of stuff, and that is for a reason. Which is what I just described.
In front of our windows, right until you would come walking down the sidewalk, and they would run and jump in a car, or 3 cars following me, moving, jockeying around at 2 in the morning on a weekday, coming home from her house, and shooting the finger at me when they would drive by, or trying to blot me in until I'd finally maneuver my way around. And the only good thing about being in Texas is what ended the stalking was when the sheriff came out to my house and said, you know what, you live in a rural area, if it's nighttime and on your property, shoot him.
Okay, so that's important there. What he just said there is important. So he's essentially saying that the sheriff was supportive, and he's trying to imply that the sheriff didn't know that these stalking activities were going on, which is ridiculous, because anyone who's going to be in a prominent position as a sheriff is going to be involved in these things and know that they're going on, and most likely a Mason. So again, what he's doing here, you can see the agenda is to try and take the emphasis off police involvement in it. And Dr. John Hall has already said that his father was a police officer. We can't prove 100% that his father was a Freemason, but there's a strong probability. And definitely, he's saying the sheriff said just shoot anyone who's on the property. I mean, that's something that's encouraging a violent act. You know what I mean? So again, he's trying to take the emphasis off of any police involvement and imply that they aren't a part of the targeting program and shift the emphasis towards this ridiculous nonsense, which is untrue, about voices being put into people's heads. And that is the silly, ridiculous V2K PSYOP, which all of these shills are told to promote, and it's all over the place. And you see all of these fake targeted individuals online. The vast majority of them talk about that stuff more than the actual legitimate targeting and stalking operations. Certainly, if you look at that show, Targeted Individuals United, with that guy who I've already exposed as an obvious shill and a Freemason, the guy Roy, all he brings on are people who talk about that nonsense over any actual targeting, legitimate things that are provable, that you can see, that you can prove, that you can record, and show the patterns. They don't focus on that, and Dr. John Hall doesn't want you to focus on that either. He just wants to push this mumbo jumbo that he's told to put out there to discredit people who he knows they are targeting and whose lives are being destroyed. I believe this man is a sociopath and he has no conscience, but we'll continue here. He's, at the very least, we can establish he's posing as someone who he's not. He's not this kind, caring, compassionate person that's putting this out there to help people. There's an ulterior motive, and he's just being used, like most of these other people are, to push an agenda, and that's the discredit, and he's being used to discredit people who these crimes are being committed against.
Thing that was questionable about what was going on. So,
so he's telling him that the sheriff encouraged him to commit violent acts, and he's implying that the sheriff was supportive of him. Now, the sheriff, in any situation like that, if this was legitimate, would know that, because the police are, anyone who's dealing with this on a real level knows that the police are involved in it, and they know what's happening. They're not going to do things like that to assist you or be supportive. They may pretend to be, to an extent, but most of the time they're told to dismiss these things and try and do anything possible to try and present the person who is being targeted as being unstable, even if it means lying and writing false reports. So again, you can see he's trying to take any emphasis away from the involvement of the police in these criminal acts, which is simply just not, has no basis in reality. I mean, them not being, they are fully a part of it, and there's no basis in reality to him shifting the emphasis away from their involvement. They are provably involved beyond any shadow of a doubt.
total of what these victims are experiencing, that's the monitoring and maybe some of the emotion manipulation. Also, you can control the brain into making the body twitch or making the body do just about anything, since everything's controlled by the brain. But there also seems to be a directed energy component to the victimization of these people, because most of them are also complaining, eye burning, skin burning, what would appear to be microwave energy-based weapons, body heating. Most of those techniques used for sleep deprivation. Almost all of the victims that I've spoken to complain that the attacks seem to be worse at night and seem to be geared at actually sleep depriving them.
Now, there could be some truth to that. I believe that they are using directed energy weapons for those things, and sleep deprivation is a big part of the operation. So there is truth to what he's saying there, undeniably. Let's go forward here. There's more.
Voices, this history of mental illness and high-fi.
Okay, so here's where we're going to get to some of the meat of what I want to talk about here.
And just so you know, these are all people that were professionals, were educated, were functioning in society just fine, and most of them were between 30 and 40 when they first started getting victimized. Much older than you would typically see somebody all of a sudden come down with schizophrenia, and no reason to have all of a sudden developed an acute delusional disorder. And I know in some of the questions I've been asked before is, how do you determine whether this is mental illness or this is somebody being victimized. And probably the biggest two.
So again, what is he trying to convey here? He's trying to convey that these symptoms mimic those of mental illness, namely schizophrenia. Now, how convenient is that when one of the main goals of the program is slandering the person and wrongly getting a false schizophrenia diagnosis and saying that the person is delusional simply for documenting the facts of the harassment, okay? How convenient is what he's saying, and how convenient is it that what he's saying corresponds almost precisely with the goals that they have of discrediting the people who they are really targeting? Now again, he's focusing mostly on that and hardly anything on the actual organized stalking activities. And that also is by design here.
Biggest discriminators that I've seen to determine that are most of the victims are educated, most of them are functioning, most of them are professionals. I've talked to a lot of doctors, a lot of lawyers.
Yeah, and because some of the people who they're choosing are very intelligent people, and of course they're functioning, and there's no history of any type of mental illness because they aren't mentally ill. They're just being harassed and stalked, and you're trying to create a false mental health, a false diagnosis. So they don't have anything like that, and that's the case. And what people like this are doing is trying to associate them with that, even though he's pretending to be in favor of the people who it's happening to. This is very clever, and this is where you got to use discernment, because they're trying to present him as someone who's trying to help these people. In reality, if somebody is really dealing with the real operation, this guy is not trying to help you. He is trying to discredit you by just putting this out there, and that's all he has to do. Is just, they want this put out there on a lot of these platforms because people are going to see it, and it is to associate people who describe these targeting the harassment activities with symptoms of schizophrenia, even though it's completely unfounded and has no basis in reality.
Whistleblowers from the National Geospatial Agency, a couple of whistleblowers I've worked with from the NSA.
Right, and those would be people who they would target too. So again, no history of mental illness or anything like that. It's saying that too.
These were functioning people.
Right,
and,
right.
And they can tell you the day they started hearing voices.
Now, there you go. And that's key right there, what he's saying right there, because that's where the lie comes in. That's where the lying comes in about they all of a sudden started hearing voices. This lie is being brought in here very strategically at this point because he wants to associate them, without saying it, with symptoms of schizophrenia. Even though he's denying that they have that, you got to see the way he's doing this to closely associate them with it.
Attack, and typically it's in the 40s, late 30s, early 40s, with no history of mental illness and high functioning in society.
Yeah.
Prior to that.
Right, and those are the people who they're targeting. No history of mental illness, fully functional, some of them quite intelligent. Those are the people who they are targeting. They're not going to target some person who is a violent criminal type of person, because if they wanted to bring somebody like that down, they could very easily do that because that person is already violent and unstable. So the police could already bait that person into a situation that could quickly get them incarcerated. These people are not violent. They're fully, they're very functional. They're usually very intelligent people who they're targeting. And this is what he's trying to do. You have to see what he's trying to do here. This is very clever, the way they put these people out there and try and present them as some sort of person who's there to help. But in reality, you got to listen to exactly what he's saying and how strategic all of this is with what he's saying.
The other big discriminator is with true mental illness, even bad schizophrenia, medication works. And being a physician, I certainly don't want to come off as saying that everybody that hears voices is being victimized by technology. There's mental illness. Schizophrenia exists. Schizophrenia usually responds to medication.
Okay, right. Now, what he's doing here is trying to differentiate between the two. And he has to do that so that it doesn't seem too obvious that what he's really trying to do is make the comparison between the two and associate the people who are being targeted with something that is identical to schizophrenia. Whether or not he's taking the side of those people is irrelevant. You have to understand the strategy of what's going on here. The intelligence agencies who put this out plan these things methodically. And it's not by accident that this person's material is widely promulgated. They want people to see him and so that they will associate these things with the people who they're targeting. Very strategic.
And in some of these victims,
But again, he's going to come off and try and act as if he's there to help people. And a lot of people, unfortunately, fall into that trap, that deception of believing that he actually is. So many of these people are just wolves in sheep's clothing, pretending to be people who they're not.
have been forced either by a licensure board or by their occupations, by in a job setting to seek psychiatric help. Many of them are placed on medications meant for schizophrenia or for delusional disorder, and so they're stuck on.
Yeah, that's because they have doctors like this guy here, who will write a false diagnosis and claim that if they have been brought there, saying that they're being stalked and targeted, then the doctor is to say that they're delusional and try and conflate it with some sort of mental health issue, when in reality there's absolutely no mental health issue, and those things are provably happening to them. Now, there are people all throughout the medical profession who are paid to write these false diagnoses and slander people who are being harassed in this way. This guy purports not to be one of those people, but he is a doctor, and they have infiltrated all of these positions, and you can clearly see, if you use discernment, what he's trying to do, just with this portion of the clip. I'm not going to go through the whole clip, but you kind of get exactly what he's doing here, and I've also shown you, exposed his connections very clearly to the police and the CIA.
Medications, and they're still being attacked.
And lo and behold, he also wants you to take a positive view. And later in this clip, it's somewhere where he says, oh, if this is happening to you, the stalking activities are happening, you should report them to the police or whatever. The police will try to help you. Now, they're not going to try to help you because they're a part of it, and he knows that fully well.
They're still hearing voices.
Now, there are some situations, if somebody gets violent with you or whatever, and it's happening, where you have no other choice other than to inform the police. But you shouldn't do it unless you have to. If somebody's made a threat of violence or gotten violent, okay, in that situation, you should, because if they don't do their job, then you can also document that they haven't done their job. But by and large, you should not contact them about this, because the police are told to lie and try and create a fake scenario to slander the person and say that they're unstable, simply for pointing out the facts of the stalking, the criminal harassment, the community mobbing, the police and first responder stalking. That's what this amounts to. He wants to take the emphasis completely off of that and put it on voices being put into people's heads. And it's all for a reason.
Now, most of the other victims I've talked to, there almost seems no reason for their victimization. I have had a handful of whistleblowers from government agencies that have came to me that are being targeted for being whistleblowers, but by and large, most of the victims seem to be randomly selected, and at least from a medical standpoint, being a physician and a researcher, this looks to me to be experimentation.
I think there may be some truth to that about it being experimental, but I think a lot of times they're chosen specifically for a reason. And it's not always something that person has necessarily done. They might not even be a whistleblower themselves. It could go back a few generations, and they are actually targeting family members. So, and continuing it on down the line. There's proof that those things do occur. So it's not always a case, although a lot of times it is, if somebody has spoken out against corruption or something like that. A lot of times they could get put on a watch list for that. But there's also situations where the person themselves might not have done anything. It could go back generations, and it could have been some sort of thing where a family member a few generations back exposed someone who was powerful or something like that. Corruption with somebody who was powerful, and they continue that on for generations. These people are psychopaths, and in some cases they actually believe in wiping out bloodlines.
It's being done in every major city. It's being done.
That's true. What he's saying there, that's absolutely true.
Methodically, like it's being done with a manual, an instruction manual.
Right, and it is. Well, essentially it is. They follow the same playbook because it's been effective over the years, and it goes all the way back to the East German Stasi and what was known as Zersetzung, or decomposition, going back to the East Germany and the whole situation there, where they were targeting the same types of people who they saw as dissidents, people who would go against the communist system, people who may be intellectuals who they did not approve of. So certainly that's where it comes from. But I mean, the origins go even further back than that.
Most of these victims will kind of report the same scenarios that they're hearing in their heads.
Here he goes again, coming back to exactly that same thing, because this is what his handlers, we've already established he has CIA connections, are telling him to continually reinforce that narrative about voices in people's heads and people hearing voices in their heads. Why do you think he's doing that? Just think about it.
Same scenarios with the organized stalking and the same scenarios with the directed energy attack.
Okay, so I think we've got some pretty good points here with Dr. John Hall. They're presenting him as somebody who just has these good intentions and that he's just there to help people. But beneath that veneer, there is clearly a sinister agenda, and I believe that this person is not really who he says he is, and that he has another agenda entirely. But we'll go through some more of these deceivers in some of the future videos as well. So that's all for now with this example here.